Live from London, this is BBC News. A historic success. That's how the US wants to portray its strikes on Iran's nuclear sites.
Decimating, choose your word, obliterating, destroying Iran's nuclear capabilities.
But Iran disagrees, its supreme leader arguing it was little more than showmanship by President Trump.
The US has failed to take action and has not achieved their intended objective.
The UK government appears set to make some concessions on its welfare bill after more than 120 Labour MPs signalled they were ready to rebel. An emotional first interview with the BBC racing commentator John Hunt, whose wife and two of his daughters were murdered last July. Hello, I'm Anita McVeigh and welcome to BBC News Now. The US Defense Secretary Pete Hegseth has described American military strikes against Iran's nuclear program as historically successful. Speaking at a news conference in Washington in the last hour, he mounted a robust and occasionally angry defense of the mission. He also attacked sections of the US media for suggesting a leaked early intelligence report showed the airstrike's impact may have been limited. It comes after Iran's supreme leader appeared on state television claiming victory over Israel and saying the US attacks had failed to achieve anything significant. More on that shortly, but first here's some more of what Pete Hegseth has been saying.
President Trump directed the most complex and secretive military operation in history, and it was a resounding success, resulting in a ceasefire agreement and the end of the 12-day war. There's been a lot of discussion about what happened and what didn't happen. Step back for a second. Because of decisive military action, President Trump created the conditions to end the war, decimating, choose your word, obliterating, destroying Iran's nuclear capabilities.
The chairman of the US Joint Chiefs of Staff, General Dan Kane, said he was confident all the so-called bunker-busting bombs used to attack the Fordow nuclear site had hit their target, saying the pilots told him the explosions had been the brightest they'd ever seen. General Kane introduced a video showing tests of the type of bomb used in the mission.
This is one weapon. So if you take a view of this as 5 additionals, you'll get a sense of what this looks like. Hopefully you can see it and there's not too much reflection. Tom runs our videos out there. We'll run it at full speed so you can see it and then go back through it. Go ahead, Tom. Keep it going for a minute. You'll see inside the mission space. Unlike a normal surface bomb, you won't see an impact crater because they're designed to deeply bury and then function. I know there's been a lot of questions about that.
Well, this all came after Iran's supreme leader claimed victory over Israel and appeared on state television, downplaying the impact of those US airstrikes on his country's nuclear program. It's the first time Ayatollah Ali Khamenei has appeared in public since the ceasefire halted days of missile and airstrikes between the two countries. He said President Trump exaggerated the impact of the strikes on the nuclear facilities.
The President of the United States exaggerated events in unusual ways, and it turns out he needed this exaggeration. Anyone who's heard these words has understood there is another truth behind them. The US has failed to take action and has not achieved their intended objective.
Well, Well, let's cross live to Jerusalem now and our correspondent Dan Johnson. Dan, we're hearing all of these different narratives about what did or didn't happen in those US airstrikes on Iran's nuclear facilities. What more is Israel saying about the damage that's been done there?
We've had very little from the Israelis since the initial welcome by Benjamin Netanyahu of these strikes, when he told the Israeli people that they had been successful in removing the dual threats posed to this country, he said. First, of Iran's nuclear program that he believed was going to build up to a nuclear weapon, but also the ballistic missile threat that Israel had been under because of the attacks that Iran had launched. The only further bit of detail that's come from the Israelis since that initial acceptance is via the country's Atomic Energy Commission, which said last night that the Iranian nuclear program had been set back 2 or 3 years in its estimation, and that there had been damage to a number of the Iranian nuclear sites. It said particularly the Fordow site had been destroyed. So in that sense, the Israeli assessment has backed up what the Americans are saying, but we've had no further response since Pete Hegseth gave that blistering press conference in the last hour. What we're seeing is the war of words, the fight for control of the narrative, because none of us know exactly how extensive that damage is. You can't even see it from the air because the site is underground. Nobody can go there and independently verify it. So the Ayatollah wants to tell his people that the impact has been limited, that the Iranian nuclear program can continue and can be rebuilt if he chooses to do that. The Americans and the Israelis want to say that their action was effective, that these strikes were historic, that they've unleashed a new weapon that has conducted this strike and eradicated the Iranian nuclear program with the depths that those bunker busters were able to get down to. We're going to see, I think, this repeated over the coming days as both sides struggle to win out in control of that narrative. Both sides wanting to tell their own people that they've achieved historic victories here.
OK, Dan, thank you very much. Dan Johnson there in Jerusalem. And with me now is Mikey Kay from the Security Brief, former British military officer. Mikey, I'll just begin by getting your initial thoughts on what we saw there in that Washington, that Pentagon news conference and that presentation in particular from General Dan Kane.
Yeah, General Dan Kane, Joint Chiefs. I think this press conference probably wasn't planned, but was told to go ahead because of the questioning on what we're calling definition of success, right? And I think we can split that into two parts. You can look at the definition of success when it comes to the ability to launch a 37-hour mission with 125 aircraft to put strategic bombers over a target which is over 16 hours away in the middle of Iran, using a GPU-57, the MOP, the Massive Ordnance Penetrator, 30,000-pound warhead, GPS guided. And in terms of that, I mean, I've been in this business for 30 years, done many combat tours, been involved in the airstrike process, and we've never seen anything like this. Add on top of that the computer modelling that's gone ahead that the Joint Chief was talking about, and the weaponeering. I mean, this is all you know, massively high-tech, evolved stuff. So weaponeering, for example, looking at what the target is, selecting the weapon, which was the GBU-57. It's a penetrator, being able to put a delayed fuse on it, and then understanding what the collateral damage of that is. So it's all state-of-the-art stuff. But then when you look at the second question of success, to what extent has Iran's ability been degraded in terms of enrichment of uranium and developing a nuclear weapons-grade capability? There's much more that needs to be answered to that in terms of the bomb damage assessment. This is absolutely critical. So, you know, when you're looking at bomb damage assessment, if you look at the Fordow facility, you can see that it's a fortified location. 200 feet underground, you've got enriched uranium halls with over 2,000 centrifuges in. First big question I've got, Anita, is were they there? Had they been moved? So,
and we didn't get an answer on that. Certainly, Pete Hegseth was asked about that, wasn't he? And there wasn't a definitive answer. We did get a lot of detail from the General about how the first strike had blown off the concrete caps that the Iranians had put on these shafts at Fordow. And then he said subsequent strikes went down that central shaft. But we still don't know, to your point, that the answer to that definitive question of how far this has set back Iran's nuclear program.
Yeah, and we've got the intelligence that was leaked, which suggested it was a few months at tops. The ventilation shafts at Fordo would have been the critical vulnerability of that location. But in terms of getting inside it, getting an independent assessment of what it looks like inside, look, there's no doubt in my mind, Anita, that whatever occurred has either degraded or severely degraded the ability to use that infrastructure to enrich. But if that 400 kilograms that the IAEA was talking about of enriched uranium-235 up to 60%, 90% being the weapons grade metric, where was that? Is that now in another undisclosed location that Iran have? And so I just think that when it comes to Fordo, its ability to be able to continue enrichment, that will have been degraded. It may have been severely degraded. But in terms of the broader, longer component of has that degraded Iran's ability to keep enriching and producing a weaponized nuclear device, we can't answer that.
And in the theatre of conflict, you will have seen this. Obviously, what we're seeing here is that the various parties to this, the various sides trying to control the narrative.
Yeah, I mean, you've got the Ayatollah saying that nothing much was hit. Trump came out initially and said it was obliterated. This is political rhetoric. What we need to get down to is we need to get down to the military parlance that General Kane, the Joint Chiefs, is talking about. We need to understand, what the target set objectives were and then relate some of these videos or the computer modeling that they're showing in these press conferences to those individual target sets. And I think if the US administration were to break those target sets down and then pick them off one by one and talk about degrading, severely degrading, destroying, deterring, then it would make it more nuanced and it would make it more understandable in terms of how that's affected Iran's nuclear capability in terms of enrichment, which is the priority one. We've got to think as well, when you're producing a nuclear weapon, it's not just about the enrichment of uranium, it's about the ability to produce a warhead. It's about the ability to put the warhead on a delivery mechanism. And coming back to the ballistic missile sites that we just heard in that soundbite, ballistic missiles are critical to being able to deliver something onto target. So that's also part of the degrading process.
OK, Mikey, thank you very much. Mikey Kay from the Security Brief. Around the world and across the UK, this is BBC News. Now, let's return for some more discussion on that news conference we saw with the US Defense Secretary Pete Hegseth and also General Dan Kane, the chairman of the US Joint Chiefs of Staff. We can talk to our North America correspondent, Nomia Iqbal. Nomia, when I spoke to you just at the end of that news conference a little earlier, we were reflecting that it was a pretty extraordinary one, weren't we?
Really extraordinary. Pete Hegseth, very angry and quite scowling, I would say. He scowled at reporters. He was pretty insulting to them, constantly calling them fake news and basically having a go at them for daring to question the administration's narrative. I mean, reporters were just doing their job, essentially asking that very crucial question. Did these strikes by the US destroy Iran's nuclear capabilities to the point where they can't enrich uranium again, where their ambitions have been set back for years, for decades? A perfectly reasonable question, but we didn't get an answer to that. We got more details about the strikes. We saw a video of the damage done to the entrance of the Fordo nuclear site. But crucially, that specific question of has this set Iran back many, many years was not answered. And I think what I also found pretty extraordinary, Nita, was that the Defense Secretary was citing the intelligence of pretty much everyone but his own. That leaked report did come from the Pentagon. They are now investigating the leaker who leaked it. And yes, it's Mr. Hegseth described it as a low confidence report in that they don't think it's met the level yet of which they can take it seriously enough, and the assessments are still going on. But he cited Iran's Iran's intelligence. He cited the UN, and even said himself, the UN is no friend to the US. Those were his words, and basically downplaying his own intelligence, even though the CIA did come out yesterday and backed Donald Trump's version of things. But it just basically, there are more questions now, even more so than there are answers about just what state is Iran's nuclear capabilities in.
Yes, plenty more questions, as a lot of experts say, it will take more time to fully establish exactly the extent of the damage in Iran and what that means for the nuclear program. And in the meantime, we heard yesterday from President Trump that US and Iranian officials would be meeting next week. What more do we know about that?
Well, I imagine President Trump still wants to negotiate. That's always been his preference, is to try and go down the diplomatic route, and that the bombing of Iran over the weekend was putting maximum pressure on them, giving the US leverage to get them to the negotiation table. We understand that the talks will happen at some point next week, not sure exactly when. The Middle East envoy Steve Witkoff is on standby to fly to wherever he needs to have those talks. The US's preference is to talk to the Iranian regime directly rather than through Oman, which has often been Iran's preference. But at the moment, it's just all kind of unclear, really, if those talks will happen. I mean, Donald Trump also said yesterday that he wouldn't rule out striking Iran again, which, of course, would massively upset his core base of supporters. But at this stage, I hate to use that cliche word, Anita, it is fluid. Like, we just don't know exactly at what point, where it could go next. But just to wrap up that press conference, we still don't have the answer to that question.
And Nomia, just as you've been talking to me, the president has posted on his Truth Social platform saying nothing was taken out of the facility at the Iran nuclear site. And that was a question that was put to Pete Hegseth a couple of times, whether any of the enriched uranium was moved by the Iranians ahead of those strikes. So Donald Trump posting on Truth Social that nothing was taken out of the facility at the Iran nuclear site. I suppose that begs the question, to what degree of with what degree of confidence is he saying that? Because lots of experts are saying it's not possible to know that yet.
Yeah, it's become a he said, she said situation where the president of the USA I've just seen that post now, is saying that they wasn't moved. Pete Hegseth saying it. They've said it many times before as well. And I suppose it's a case of, well, this is what the US administration is saying. This is what the experts are saying. Who do you believe? And that goes to the heart of Pete Hegseth's anger in that press conference, in which he believes that the press should be on the side of the Trump administration, that the press, as he described it, should be capturing these big moments and not ruining things, as how he viewed it. But of course, reporters, that's our job, isn't it, to be objective, to ask those questions. And but Mr. Hegseth, I think, saw those questions as insufficiently patriotic. He feels that by questioning the mission by the US, it's not showing respect to the troops, to the soldiers that were involved. But nonetheless, those questions will still be asked.
OK, Nomia, thank you very much for that. Nomia Iqbal, our North America correspondent. 3 Palestinians have been shot dead after dozens of Israeli settlers attacked a Palestinian village in the occupied West Bank. It happened in the village of Kafr Malik, close to Ramallah. Our correspondent Wira Davis has been to the village and sent this report.
Behind me is the village of Kafr Malik. Now, a funeral has just taken place there this morning of 3 young men who were shot dead yesterday in confrontations between villagers and settlers. Israelis who had come down from a nearby illegal outpost and had attacked the village. They'd set fire to several cars. The Israeli military has acknowledged that it intervened in these clashes between settlers and villagers when they came down to the village. Now, according to the Israeli army, they were attacked then by people from inside the village. The Israeli army says it returned fire and killed 3 people. There's 7 people injured. But villagers we've spoken to, and our colleagues from BBC Arabic have spoken to, were adamant that there was no fire from within the village itself. The Israeli army, according to the villagers, intervened on the side of the settlers, and they then shot dead 3 people. What is not in doubt is that 3 young people were killed, several more were injured. And this is the latest incident in the West Bank in recent months, where tensions have been rising, almost mirroring to an extent what has been happening in Gaza. Ever since October the 7th, nearly 2 years ago, 21 months ago, nearly 1,000 people, nearly 1,000 Palestinians have been killed in violence in the West Bank. 35 Israelis have also been killed over that period. But it's been clearly a period when Israeli settlers have become increasingly emboldened, specifically because of speeches and statements by Israeli politicians. Only last month, 22 new illegal settlements were approved by the Israeli government, and tensions here in the West Bank have been rising, just as those, of course, have been well covered in Gaza.
Wira Davis reporting. Here in the UK, a rebellion against the government by 120 of its own MPs over plans to cut disability benefits shows no sign of dying down, despite ministers discussing the prospect of more concessions. A vote on the welfare bill is due to happen in the House of Commons on Tuesday of next week. The Labour backbenchers have signed an amendment calling for the proposals to be scrapped, making an embarrassing defeat for the government possible. Number 10 has admitted that getting the policy right is not easy. Well, ministers predict the number of people on sickness and disability benefit will double in the coming years, and that measures such as making it harder to claim personal independence payments will save £5 billion a year. Prime Minister Sir Keir Starmer spoke earlier in the House of Commons and addressed the concerns around the welfare system.
On social security, I recognise there is a consensus across the House on the urgent need for reform of our welfare system, because the British people deserve protection and dignity when they're unable to work, and support into work when they can. At the moment, they are failed every single day by the broken system created by the Conservatives, which achieves neither. I know colleagues across the House are eager to start fixing that, and so am I, and that all colleagues want to get this right, and so do I. We want to see reform implemented with Labour values of fairness. That conversation will continue in the coming days so we can begin making change together on Tuesday.
Let's stay with this story because Ben Shue from BBC Verify has been looking at the details of the proposed reforms and the debate around their impact.
Let's look in a bit more detail at the government's welfare reforms which are prompting such resistance from Labour MPs. There are 2 main elements. First, a cut in the rate of incapacity benefit. This is for people who are generally economically inactive. Second, to make it harder for people to claim personal independence payments, or PIP. These are support payments for people with a disability, and importantly, around 1/5 of people on PIP are working. Together, these reforms are projected to save around £5 billion a year by 2030. But the government's own impact assessment says these reforms could push around 250,000 people, including 50,000 children, into relative income poverty by the end of the decade. But here's some more very important context for this. This shows projections for total spending on working age health and disability benefits by the Office for Budget Responsibility from last autumn's budget. It was projected to rise from around £60 billion this year to £76 billion by 2030, so an increase of around £15 billion. But here are the latest forecasts from the Office of Budget Responsibility in blue, which factor in those planned cuts. And as you can see, the bill is still rising to £72 billion in 2030. It's just going up slightly less rapidly. This reflects the fact that even with the plans to make it harder to access personal independence payments, the government thinks the number of people claiming it will continue to grow. This gives a sense of the pressure the system is putting on the public finances and why the government feels a need to tackle it.
Ben Chu from BBC Verify. North Korea has inaugurated a large new beach resort on its east coast. North Korea's leader Kim Jong-un called the Galma resort the first step in developing cultural tourism. Galma boasts a 4-kilometre sandy beach, hotels that can welcome 20,000 guests, and food, sport and entertainment facilities. Russian tourists are expected to visit it soon, but the first arrivals from next week will be domestic visitors. Now, just to tell you that we have got business and sport coming up for you very soon. But before that, the director of the next James Bond film has been revealed. Amazon MGM Studios have announced that the acclaimed director Denis Villeneuve will direct the next film. Best known for his work on the Dune films, Arrival and Blade Runner 2049, the Oscar-nominated director has described himself as a die-hard Bond fan who intends to honour the tradition of the franchise. In a statement, he says he is aware of the massive responsibility of directing the first film since the franchise moved to Amazon MGM. But as for who will play James Bond in that movie, no hint yet. The speculation on that continues, of course. Do stay with us here on BBC News.
Now on BBC News, the latest from New York and around the world. Business Today.
Live from New York at the opening bell, this is Business Today. Wall Street opens up as investors cheer strong earnings from chip makers, pushing Nvidia back to the top spot as the world's most valuable company. Trading up, the UK promises more help for exporters and more protection for British firms as they face a tough new international business environment. And main stage capitalism, mega music festival Glastonbury is bigger than ever. So why are smaller rivals struggling to survive? Welcome to Business Today, live from New York. I'm Michelle Fleury, and we start right here in the United States, where the greenback, the dollar, is under pressure. It's hit a three-year low following reports President Trump is considering naming his pick for the Federal Reserve chair early. Now, according to the Wall Street Journal, Jerome Powell's replacement could be announced as soon as this summer, which could undermine the central bank, fueling bets on interest rate cuts. This as revised figures show the US economy shrank at a 0.5% annual pace from January to March. That was far more than previously thought. For more on all of this, I'm joined by Victoria Fernandez, Chief Market Strategist at Crossmark Global Investments. Victoria, good to see you this morning. I want to start, though, with the S&P 500, flirting with a record high. You've got Nvidia, again, sort of reaching for the sky. What is driving these markets when you consider geopolitical tensions, tariffs, and what we just referred to there about uncertainty at the Fed?
Right. Michelle, when you look at the environment as a whole, we keep saying there's so much uncertainty, and it is driving some of the elements you were talking about, the weaker dollar being one of those. But yet here we are with the S&P almost at new highs. I think the market is looking at some of the uncertainties that we had and thinking we are on a path to reducing the level of uncertainty in those, whether it's geopolitical events, now that we have kind of a time of peace or truce there going on between Iran and Israel. When we're looking at tariffs, we're getting close to the 90-day limit where those are supposed to come back into effect. But they're assuming, as Trump has postponed those before, we might see that again, or at least it would be at a much smaller level that the market would be able to anticipate. And you're seeing rotation in the leadership of the market with semiconductors coming back into play. That's really boosting this market as well. So I think it's a little bit of optimism from the market about what is to come, along with the fact that we're seeing some downtrodden sectors improve.
I mean, is there a danger, I want to talk to you about the Fed, that we start to see a sort of shadow Fed emerge? You've got Donald Trump, who has frequently insulted and criticized the head of the Fed. You've got then recently two Fed governors kind of calling for a rate cut as early as July, kind of breaking ranks. They were backed by Donald Trump and sort of have connections to the president. I mean, how much does that undermine that idea of the independence of the Fed?
That's exactly the question. Markets do not like to think that the independence of the Fed would be threatened. And basically what we're talking about is kind of putting in a backseat driver to the Fed and really undermining the power that Powell has with his influence in the Federal Open Market Committee meetings. So does he become more of a lame duck Fed president? And if so, then what does that mean in regards to this wait and see environment that he has really been pushing? It allows those other voices like Michelle Bowman, like Waller that you're mentioning that are more dovish. It allows those voices to be more heard. But we also have to be concerned with whoever Trump may nominate as early as this summer. Kind of puts a target on their back, as well as they're going to have to go in and say they don't agree with what the Fed is doing. So lots of uncertainty there around where the Fed could be positioned going forward.
Certainly doesn't look like a quiet summer ahead. Victoria Fernandez, Chief Market Strategist at Crossmark Global Investments. Thanks for joining us this morning.
My pleasure.
Now to the UK, where the Prime Minister, Sir Keir Starmer, has been laying out the government's new trade strategy after what he called a hat-trick of recent trade deals. That's the US, India and the European Union. All of this comes, of course, at a time of increased geopolitical tensions and increased protectionism. Now, the government's plan aims to boost opportunities for British businesses to export while protecting domestic firms from unfair trade practices, all trying to achieve that important thing of economic growth. Our business editor, Simon Jack, is at the British Chambers of Commerce event where the Prime Minister was speaking. Simon, you've witnessed these kind of changes in policy before. What are your main takeaways today?
Well, the context for this, Michelle, is that he was walking into what is quite a hostile crowd in some ways after a massive charm offensive with business before the election. In the autumn budget last year, the Chancellor hit businesses with the lion's share of a massive tax rising budget. £25 billion was the bill to business. And they haven't really forgiven him for that. And he came in and he acknowledged the fact that, yes, I have asked a lot of you in order to try and settle the public finances. But as you say, there was a new strategy today. Today was the turn of the trade strategy. Now, it's very hard to have a unilateral trade strategy. This is an international game of give and take, as you know so well. So this was more, to use an American sports metaphor, perhaps this is about offense and defense. On offense, there was more financial backing for exporters, some help in them navigating complex international trade rules. But on defense, perhaps the more important bit is what is going to happen to the goods that might have ended up in the US, which are being blown onto other shores, including the UK, by the Trump tariff offensive. So they're saying that they're going to make sure that, for example, steel makers are protected from an influx of cheap foreign steel, mainly from China and India and other places. So a bit of offense, a bit of defense. This is the third strategy we've had in as many almost days. We've had an industrial strategy, we had an infrastructure strategy, and this is all part, I think, of Keir Starmer's attempt to say, I know I hit you hard at the end of last year, but I am still on your side.
Our business editor, Simon Jack, I know you will stay across this. Thank you very much. Well, Ali Renison is a former UK trade advisor. She is now a director with SEC Newgate. Ali, great to have you with us. As we just heard there from Simon, it was a bit of a hostile crowd. But the fact of the matter is exports have been weak. It's been a drag on UK growth. Do you think this addresses that?
Well, I think this is reflective of the reality that we're in, which is we are now in a world where trade has to think about economic security. And I think that's where the defense part of that comes in, is making sure that the government can respond to whether it's sort of dumped goods or sort of unfair trade practices from other countries. But I do think it's important to stress that what I see out of this trade strategy, which is a fairly grown-up one that tries to bridge together policy measures with kind of practical measures around customs and border processes. You heard the likes of the British International Freight Association, Logistics UK, we're very happy to see that part of it, that says we fundamentally believe ultimately that trade is still part of our way to economic growth. And I think that's an important message to be heard.
I mean, one of the measures that are included in this idea of joining the European Customs Pact, the Pan-Euro-Mediterranean Convention. How would that help businesses? Is that something everyone will be on board with, or do you think there could be significant pushback? I mean, I know it's just an idea at this point they're considering.
Yeah, they're consulting on it. And ultimately what rules of origin are about are saying, if you've got sort of parts and components coming from other countries, how do we factor that in to ensure that you still get preferential tariff access to the countries that are negotiating? So ultimately, let's say at the moment between the UK and the EU, we have bilateral accumulation rules of origin, which means that really only stuff coming in from the UK and the EU gets counted towards preferential tariff access. If you've got a lot of content, let's say in your cars coming from other parts of the world, they don't. And I think PEM, the Pan-European Mediterranean Convention, is an attempt to try and address the complexity of global supply chains, just to make sure that those things get counted in and you still get your tariff access.
I mean, is this enough to try and address the headwinds we see from rising protectionism?
I think it depends on your vantage point, ultimately. I think it's very important that you have a government that is saying we still believe that the way in which we want to approach trade matters for our economic future, for our economic growth. We have also balanced that by saying we're going to have these deterrent tools, tougher trade tools, question mark about whether they actually get used. But one of the things I also think that's quite important is that, very often with free trade deals that take many years to negotiate, I think businesses sometimes kind of lose interest. And one of the things the trade strategy tries to do is say, we hear you, we're going to do smaller, basically mini deals, let's say sector-specific ones that align to the industrial strategy, so that we can make progress quicker and you can actually, as business and an economy, feel the benefits of what our trade policy moves are actually doing.
Ali Renson, we're going to have to leave it there, but thanks for joining us. Now to the gates in the UK, where we are seeing them open at Glastonbury as the world-famous music festival gets underway. Over 200,000 people will be at this year's extravaganza, with thousands of performers looking to wow the crowds on over 100 stages. The BBC has been speaking to some of the festival goers.
Welcome to Glastonbury, everyone. Keep moving. You can't do this to me. I've been queuing since 3 a.m.
Best festival in the world, hands down, better than anything.
Looking forward to seeing the Sisters. I think that'll be a good blast.
We attend the festival
every year. I've been coming here since I was 16. I'm not going to tell you my age now, but for many, many years. But yeah, I would never, ever miss a year. It's just the best.
The view there from some festival goers. But Glastonbury's phenomenal success masks some serious challenges for the wider festival business. Almost 250 annual events in the UK have disappeared since 2019, according to a new report. John Rostron, CEO of the Association of Independent Festivals, explained why so many are struggling.
The costs, really, of running a festival, that's been the big challenge. It's a big, risky business, putting on an event. Costs have risen tremendously since Brexit and the pandemic together. And also supplier chain terms have got really tough since that time. And so for a lot of the festivals, most festivals in the UK are independent. It costs a lot of money to put an event on, and people have just run out of money and can't get the gates open. That's been the biggest challenge.
John Rostron there. Well, in other news, Meta's use of millions of books to train its artificial intelligence models has been judged fair by a US federal court. Around a dozen authors had brought the case forward following how Meta had used a library of millions of online books to train its AI models. This case is among dozens of legal battles working their way through the courts as creators seek financial compensation for their work being used by big tech. The former boss of Barclays Bank, Jez Staley, has lost his appeal against a ban from working in the financial industry. The ban was proposed by the UK's Financial Conduct Authority. It also fined him $2.28 million for misleading them about his links to the late disgraced financier American Jeffrey Epstein. Staley had challenged the decision in court, but the tribunal ruled against him. And dating app Bumble is axing almost a third of its workforce as it struggles to grow, and investors are downbeat on its future prospects. In a note to staff, Chief Executive Whitney Wolfe Herd said she was responding to pressures facing the company as the dating industry faces an inflection point. And just a reminder, the markets are all higher, the S&P 500 rising near that record. And that is it from us here on Business Today. Do stay profitable. Goodbye.
I was on air when the London 7/7 attacks happened. That day was different because of the sheer volume of information we were grappling with in real time. We couldn't let the desperation for news influence our reporting or be overwhelmed by the magnitude of what we were witnessing. Today, as we wade through endless waves of misinformation, it's vital that we don't just ask the questions, we question the answers. I'm Matthew Emery-Waller on Verified Live for BBC News.
Two police officers have been found guilty of gross misconduct over the strip search of a 15-year-old schoolgirl. Misconduct has been proven in the case of a third officer. Child Q was wrongly suspected of possessing cannabis and searched by officers at her school in East London in December 2020. Let's speak now to our UK correspondent, Adina Campbell. Adina, first of all, just remind us a little bit more about the background to this.
Well, this case dates back to December 2020 when child Q was wrongly suspected of possessing cannabis. She had turned up to her school that day expecting to take mock exams, and the teachers there had strongly suspected that she was carrying cannabis. They then called the police because they had carried out a bog-standard school search of her outer clothing. They still thought that she was in possession of these drugs. That's when they decided to call the police. The police arrived, and then she was taken into a medical room and then strip searched. She was asked to expose her most intimate parts, and all of this happened while she was on her period, and no appropriate adult was present, and the search itself left her feeling physically violated. Now, details of this case were published 2 years later in a safeguarding report that said that the search was unjustified and that racism was likely to have been a factor. 5 years later, we have had this 3-week disciplinary hearing involving the 3 Metropolitan Police officers who took that course of action. 2 of them, PC Christina Linger, who is now a TDC, a trainee detective constable, the action that she took has been found to have amounted to gross misconduct, along with the action of PC Rafael Smedinsky, who was the leading officer that day. The action of PC Victoria Ray, her action amounted to misconduct. Interestingly, the hearing today has also been looking at how race may have played a part in this, but the hearing said that the officers were not influenced by child Q's race, and this was not a subject of adultification. They said that this, the panel said, having assessed the evidence, we do not accept an inference that race was an effective cause of this incident. We see no evidence that officers treated child Q older than she was. Now, we have had some reaction by the Metropolitan Police in the last hour, who've released a statement. Commander Kevin Southworth says that he is deeply sorry to child Q and her family for the trauma caused to her and the damage that this incident has caused in terms of trust and confidence experienced by black communities across London. He goes on to say that we acknowledge there were organisational failings and that training to our officers around strip search and the type of search carried out on child Q was inadequate, and our oversight of the power was also severely lacking. In the next hour or so, we are expecting to find out exactly what course of action will be taken against these 3 officers. They could be sacked.
Adina, thank you very much for taking us through that. Adina Campbell. The BBC racing commentator John Hunt says there was nothing he saw in the behaviour of his daughter Louise's former boyfriend that suggested he would go on to kill her, her mother and sister. In March, Kyle Clifford was given 3 life sentences for the triple murder. Speaking a year after the attack in which Carol, Hannah and Louise Hunt died, John and his eldest daughter Amy have described the legacy of love they left behind. They spoke to Victoria Derbyshire.
The Hunt family was a very happy one until it was torn apart by the actions of Kyle Clifford, Louise's ex-boyfriend. In July last year, he fatally stabbed mother Carol and shot Louise and her sister Hannah with a crossbow. Now, a year on, John Hunt says Louise and Kyle Clifford's relationship wasn't coercive or controlling, despite some reports.
He never once hit her. He was in the house an awful lot in that 18 months. I never heard raised voices once.
Bearing in mind what you've already told us, but was there anything in his behaviour that suggested he could have been capable of what was to come?
No. Though we were under no illusions at the end that Kyle Clifford was not that nice of a person. You know, I want to put it very bluntly now. did we have any indication that this man was capable of stabbing my mother, tying Louise up, raping Louise, shooting Louise, and shooting Hannah? Absolutely not. Absolutely not.
John still lives in the family home, and he and Amy both feel connected to Carol, Hannah and Louise.
From the moment I wake up, I say good morning to each of them.
Do you?
I talk to them all every day, and then as I close my eyes at night, I chat to them as well. So, yeah, very close all the time.
Always, yeah. And it's, you know, it's the three of them. Genuinely, I wish everyone could see now, but they were the best of us.
John's found support returning to work as a racing commentator.
It's Gold Cup day here today.
And the bond that he and Amy share has been vital in helping each other through the most traumatic of times. Victoria Derbyshire, BBC News.
And if you are watching in the UK, you can see the full interview, Standing Strong, the John and Amy Hunt interview with Victoria Derbyshire. That's at 9 p.m. on BBC One here in the UK and on the iPlayer. Matthew will be here with you next for all the latest developments on the situation regarding Iran, including, of course, that news conference in the last short while from the US Defence Secretary Pete Hegseth. Do stay with us here on BBC News.